Hi, and welcome to Playing with Problems. I am Alex Terranova, your host, and I'm really excited. I'm just going to say it. I didn't know if I was going to do this on this first episode, but this is the first episode. I had thought about before this. Am I going to say it's the first episode? Because what if I don't release them in order, or what if there's something wrong? And I think when we're starting something, we just got to dive in. We just got to jump in and embrace that this is the first one. And I think even just sharing that with the audience and letting you know, not from a like, give me your pity or your sympathy, but letting you know that, hey, we just started. This is the first one. And I hope this is the first of many. I've done so many podcasts, whether it be the Dream Mason podcast or the Coaching Show podcast or the Frequency Shifters podcast or a podcast I used to have called Flip the Lens and being a guest. It's interesting how even though I've done so many, I'm a little nervous to start this one. And my guest today knows this is obviously she's listening right now, and she knows that we talked about this before. She was a little nervous. She being the first guest, this podcast is obviously a little different than most podcasts. So we're in this together. You as the audience, you're in this with us now.
Mhm.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to this. And as you listen to this show, the one thing I want to remind people is try to listen to this show as if it was your own life. So instead of listening to me or my guests as like what we're dealing with or what we're talking about, see if you can hear through the lens of your own life. Look at the challenges that you're struggling with, be it financial or family or personal or health or wealth. What can I see for myself? Um, my biggest motivation in creating this was not only for me to be able to support people on this show as the guest, but that the ripples of that we're all actually dealing with really similar things. And that if we can hear someone else talk about it, we can see it from a different perspective and maybe we can gain insight into our own lives. So with that, I'm going to introduce our very first guest on Playing with Problems. So she is a former lawyer. She is now a spiritual teacher and coach, and she works with high achieving women, helping them heal from deregulated nervous systems, codependency, and addictive behaviors to create highly satisfying and spacious and prosperous lives. She's also the host of The Skeptic's Guide to a Spiritual Life. She's a mother of two, and she's married. And I just want to say thank you, Megan. Let me just say your full name. This is Meghan Smith. She's our first
Okay.
guest. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being, brave and vulnerable and willing to just throw your hat in the ring and be here with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I love the concept of this. I love there's so much pressure, especially as a coach, I think, to look like you have all facets of your life figured out. And so more and more, I'm just so excited to talk about the facets of my life that are not figured out. And give myself space and grace around that. And for me, this is one of the ways to do that is just to talk about it in a really normal way because it is normal.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of the first people who wanted to jump on here with me, a lot of them were coaches
Yeah.
and various, some were health coaches, right? Some were legal coaches, the spectrum. But what I loved about seeing that happen, because on a lot of my other shows, I don't interview coaches. It's not on the coaching show I do, but on a lot of the other ones, I'm not with coaches. What I love is a lot of coaches relate to being a coach as being a leader and being a leader as being a coach. And to me, if you're not willing to be vulnerable and you're not actually willing to show us who you really are, you're not really a leader.
Yeah,
So
totally.
let's start with I really want people to get a little bit about like who you are before we jump into like what's going on. So I always ask people as they're setting up with me, what makes you successful? Why is Megan Smith successful in her life?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think um, I'm going to start with, I'm not going to go all the way back to the beginning, but I'm going to start with becoming a lawyer. Like that's kind of the beginning of my professional journey. I actually didn't become a lawyer till I was 31. I went to it late in life after I had another career. Um, And even then, like, my other career was very successful at. I've always been very successful at what I do. My very first job when I was 13, I think I got my first job at a fast food restaurant. I was promoted to manager by the time I was 14, and I was the youngest manager they'd ever had. But they were, because they were like, "This chick, no, like, we can trust this chick. Like, let's just give her the keys to the store." So that's always who I've been. I've always been somebody you can trust. I've always been somebody who got it very quickly, who could deliver exactly what was needed very quickly. So that's part of who I am. It's also part of why it's so embarrassing or like there's a lot of shame around the parts that I can't get, that I feel like I can't get. So, but that's for the next part of this conversation. So, went to law school, top of my class. I can see now that I went to law school because I was trying to prove that I was good enough in the world. And doctors, lawyers, couple other
Mm,
professions maybe, I held as this sort of top echelon of people that if I could get into that group, then people would finally understand that I was worth something, you know? Obviously, I didn't know I was doing that at the time. So I did that, right? I got top of my class. I got a great job in a great city in Vancouver. Great job, I'll put in quotes. Looked great on paper.
yeah.
Total nightmare for me and for a lot of people. But I was smart. You know, I was smart. I knew how to play the game. I knew how to talk to people, that whole thing. That made me very, very, very miserable. And I got pregnant while I was in my first year of practice. And while I was off, when I left to go on mat leave, so I live in Canada. This is an important piece of the story. In Canada, you get a full year off when you have a baby. Legally, your employer has to give you a full year off. So I took that year. And in Canada, a lot of your employers pay you to be on leave. So my employer also paid me $30,000 while I was off on leave for a year. The catch was if I didn't go back, I had to pay it back.
Mm,
So come the end of my year, I I knew the whole year I didn't want to go back, so I saved the money. And then when the day came for me to go back, they almost had me. They almost reeled me back in. I set a date to go back. I was like, okay, I'm going to try it. And then pretty much like 3 days before I was supposed to go back, I pulled the plug and I was like, nope, I can't do it. I'm not willing to put myself through a year of this misery. That's something I'm very, very, very proud of. And to me, in my current life, I consider that like a massive part of my success. Being willing to listen to myself about that, being willing to trust something, being willing to pay back $30,000. And more importantly, like leaving behind an identity I just worked so hard for was huge, 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 huge turning point in my life. Um, Fast forward to becoming a coach, you know, coaching is a very hard industry to succeed in. I don't know what the stats are. I could make them up, but it's like a very, very like the amount of people who set out to become a coach, do their training and actually, you know, grow successful businesses is pretty low.
yeah.
Um, you know, I signed up for a coach training program. You and I have done the same one. As you know, in month one, they're like, go out and get a paying client. Um, Most people don't. Not this gal. This gal had a paying client within the first month, you know, like just from the beginning, clients. I had clients, they were paying me, they were seeing success. I was getting great feedback. I'm a good coach. You know, I'm really good at what I do. The same skills that made me really good at that fast food restaurant make me really good at coaching. I pay attention. I see the details. I see people and also extremely empathetic. Um, so essentially within the first 3 years of having a coaching business, I had replaced my income from my last legal job. Now, during those 3 years, did not feel like I was having success because you know, it was terrifying. You know, I left behind a job that was paying me very well with benefits um, to basically making nothing. It was terrifying. So, you know, I tell this story and I used to listen to coaches tell stories like this and be like, oh my God, like that, you know, it sounds like it was so easy for them. Like they had, and it wasn't. It was very, very, very difficult. But I persevered through it. And it's part of my success was like getting all the support I needed continuously to keep choosing it over and over and over and over again. Because every month, predictably, I'd be like, you know what? I'm just gonna go get a job. I still do that probably more like every 6 months now. I'm like, I'm just gonna go get a job.
I wanna because you just hit on a bunch of, you told us this story, but as you were telling it, I was writing down these things that I noticed.
Yeah.
Trust, delivering and executing, being smart, self-trust, um, attention to details, being supportive, looking good on paper. There's so many things. Some of these things it feels like you hold as that's what makes me successful, right?
Yeah.
Looking good on paper is was like one thing, but then on the other side, one trust or sorry, delivering and executing kind of goes with that, like
Yep.
looking good on paper. And
Yep.
then there's the things like self trust and um, like choosing in service of you.
Hmm.
How do you define success? Like, what are you measuring these things based on?
Yeah, that's great. Well, so I think I do hold two different definitions, right? I think there's like, I'm going to really simplify it. I think there's the traditional, mainstream's not quite what I mean, but mainstream definition of success, right? Which is like independent, like in Western culture, success is like leaving the nest and being able to support yourself, um, being able to take care of your basic needs, and then some, right? Like that, like you are an independent adult who knows how to function in the world and uses their full potential. And this is something I hear a lot from my clients, right? Like I'm not using my potential if I don't blank. So that's how I was holding it. And to a certain extent, still hold it that way. But the definition of success that I now am intending to live inside, and I don't always do perfectly, but is a fulfillment of who I actually am in the world. And as being an expression of who I actually am in the world as much as possible.
Mm,
And I still think that those sort of like material things that flow from that are part of that for me. Is that ultimately leads to a financial and material level of comfort. And I don't know what that level is. Like I can't give you necessarily what it is for me even. Well, I probably could if I really thought about it, but that there is a certain level of material comfort to me that is part of that definition of success.
I
But
think
only if I'm expressing myself to get it. Like
sure.
that's a necessary ingredient.
Yeah, it's like one without the other doesn't
Exactly.
count anymore. Do you
Yeah.
think you had to have the societal success first to get you to this like let's call it of your evolved success? Do you think could you have done it the other way?
I don't think I could have. Maybe somebody else could have, for sure. I think a lot of the time I actually talk about, so I also do 12-step work, which is another part of my story, which is really important to me. But I often when I'm in that world, I speak about going to law school, getting the top of my class, getting the best job as my bottom. Like
Mm.
for me, that was the bottom that I needed to hit, was to achieve all of that and realize how empty it made me. And that like none of that actually got me what I wanted. I needed to see that all the way to its end, including spending, $100,000 on a law degree and then walking away from $30,000. Like all of that was part of me getting that wasn't going to get me what I wanted.
That's such a I love how you shared that. The thing how your sorry, how others top, right?
Yeah.
Others pinnacle of I've made it
Yeah.
was your rock bottom in a way.
It was my bottom because it showed me the disparity between who the world thought I was and how I felt. And I was like, this is great. Everyone thinks I'm awesome and I feel awful and lonely and invisible. And like gap was so big and painful that was my bottom.
Oh, I love it. It's to me over here, like that to me is your biggest, that's what makes you successful, right? Is
Yeah.
that you, especially in the world that we live in, had the courage and the faith in yourself and your family and the support structures you had that you would follow, that you would go against the grain,
Yeah.
right? And pay back that money and leave that
Yeah.
that quote unquote stability and all the achievements
Yeah.
because it actually wasn't fulfilling or satisfying. You and I both, as coaches, know all the clients we have that hate their jobs, or even people that are unhappy in their marriages.
Yeah.
That, and I don't mean unhappy like, hey, I want to be here and it's not working. I mean, I should be leaving. I
Yeah.
never should have been with this person, that don't have the courage to do the thing that, their heart or their soul or their desires calling for, because they're trying to do the right thing or the thing
Yeah.
that they should do.
Yeah. Because it feels scary not to. It really does. And a lot of it's tied up in our parents, our relationship to our parents, I find, like it feels like a betrayal. But yes, all of that to say, I am incredibly proud of that. I'm so, so, so proud of that work. And like you said, like it's part of what makes me a really good coach because I've walked through it. Like when I say to my clients or when I hold the space for my clients to make a really bold decision, I'm holding it from a place of I've done this. I've done the thing where I've basically walked away from everything that I'd poured into and I walked into the void and had no idea what was going to happen. It took a lot of risks. And I'm so, so proud of that. And that was the thing when I stood on the precipice of like, am I going back to this law job or am I going to walk away? The two things I thought were one, a year is a really long time to be miserable. What if this is it? What if this is my last year on earth? I'm gonna sell it for $30,000? No fucking way. And two, what would I want for my daughter if she was standing at this precipice? She was one at the time. And I thought if she was standing here, what would I want for her? I would not want her to go. I would tell her, like, you're gonna be fine. Like, go and do the thing you love. None of this matters. None of like it doesn't matter. I know it feels like it matters and it doesn't. And so those were the 2 things that I chose from, and it was so scary.
Do you think there's a few attributes that had you like, would, or how could you define those attributes that had you be successful? And again, success in this is like being able to choose
Mhm.
the path that you did. What made that possible?
Well, I mean, I think, a lot of privilege and, like,
Sure.
yeah, like, even though it was scary and it felt scary, I also had ultimately, I knew that if I was an employable person. I'm an able-bodied, you know, normal, quote unquote, normal person, I could walk into any place and get a job at any time. So I want to acknowledge that, that I really like, I have a massive amount of privilege behind me. Um, that cushioned that a little bit. But I think, I don't know. I kind of don't know. Like, I think it, in some ways, I relate to it now that I do more spiritual work as a spiritual push, like that I had some spiritual force behind me because I didn't it's easy to describe it now as this like, there was this turning point and it was really clear and I chose and it was really messy and really hard. And so I think I had this like spiritual force behind me that was sort of pushing me towards this decision. Um, and I also think that I have this streak in me that's a little bit rebellious maybe, or like like, if there's something I take pride in about, like, doing things different than everybody else, as much as I also wanted to fit in with everybody else, this piece of, like, it's kinda cool. Like, I kinda knew it was a bit rock star in some way at the time to be like, "I don't need this. Like, look at you suckers at this law firm, and I can, like, walk away and do my own thing." So, kind of a combination of those things.
So faith and trust
Mm. Mhm.
and capable,
Yep,
right? I would say those that gave you those were
totally.
attributes. Also, I love that you put in that piece about privilege, in the sense, because there are so many people that have as much privilege or more than you that still don't make the choice.
Yep,
So if we were speaking with someone who didn't have food, air, shelter, water, like couldn't feed their family or their kids, this would be a different conversation.
of course.
I talk about this so often that I'm not talking to that person.
Yeah,
Right. And I think a lot of people that will be listening to this, that's not their situation. A lot of people listening to this conversation are people that have become lawyers and doctors and very successful and going, this isn't working for me.
yeah,
And yet a lot of them are not making it. So there is something to say about, um, just because we have privilege doesn't mean that we still do. Most of us, especially in westernized worlds are still not making that choice.
Yep.
Um, can we turn a little bit? Is there anything else you want to say about your success before we transition into looking at
I do want to say one more thing. I do want to share a little bit about 12 step work because it's a really important part of my story and it's going to play into what we talk about next. So,
this?
the other thing that I'm really, really proud of is I do 12 step work, A, for codependency, what I call chaos creating, controlling, fixing, and addiction to adrenaline. And I've been religiously part of that fellowship for about 2.5 years now. And I work that program. I'm also a recovering food addict. And in the last year and a half, I have lost 125 pounds.
Oh,
Yeah. And I've been overweight my whole life. And so this, like, to me, this is the culmination of like a lot of the work that I've done over the past 5 years. To me, starting with that decision to walk away from law is like the foundation it's all built on. Is like really unraveling my disease. Like a lot of this I relate to my lawyer work and all of that as part of my addiction. My workaholism and all of that plays into it. So I'm living a recovered life. And that's a very, very important part of my story and something I'm really, really, really proud of.
mm, thanks for sharing that. Can I ask you something about that?
Yeah.
Does the You described it as chaos, like an addiction to adrenaline,
Yeah.
um, and then the food piece,
Yeah.
almost like separate, like
Yeah.
they're together, but they're separate. Um, how does that play into the life? Like, what's what are the through lines that connect, right? If you're being a lawyer and you're like, I'm doing all the things I'm supposed to do,
Hmm.
but then there's these pieces of your life that are not what you're right. You're not supposed to be a food addict. You're not supposed to be
Totally.
chaos oriented. What's the connection?
Um, well, I'm going to answer what I think you're asking. You tell me if I've missed it, but that was part of the disconnect, right? Is like, here I was, this success, and I was numbing how miserable I was with food and alcohol.
Yeah.
Um, but I also chose a career that fed my adrenaline addiction. So I actually wasn't using food that much during law school because I was so high on adrenaline all the time. Using adrenaline to power myself through exams and studying and all of that. So actually my food and my alcohol addiction weren't all that rampant
Mhm.
during law school. But then when I got into the practice of law, it was just like so elevated. And so it was like I use adrenaline. Um, and that's really simplifying things. But I use adrenaline, I use shame, I used um all of that stuff to like motivate me through being a lawyer through a work day. And then I would medicate that with food, alcohol, whatever. Um, and just in this like vicious cycle. And then there was this disconnect between like I have this really great life on paper and here I am like eating myself and drinking myself into a stupor every day, like
Yeah.
so that was it's all part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, they compensate, right, for each
Yeah.
other. I was just reading about and I'd heard this, but I hadn't really looked into it. I was just reading about how sometimes, women specifically will create food addictions or gain a lot of weight because of, like, sexual traumas and
Hmm.
things that have happened as it's like this psychological protection mechanism, right?
Yep.
Like, if I'm bigger, I won't be like prey essentially
Yep.
to men, and I had heard that before, and it's taking right, we have one problem, which is this fear, which is a very real fear,
Very
and
much.
then we create a new problem gets created, and that's what it's not the same, right? But it there's a parallel, and you had a one problem that then other problems got
Yep.
created out of.
Yeah. Totally. And I mean, that's how to me, that's like how almost every addiction starts, right? It's like
Yeah,
it's we start forming our addiction when we're young. Most of us experience some form of trauma, whether big T trauma or little T trauma when we're little. And then we start building on top of it. And like you said, yeah, we sort of like take one problem and then like create this bubble around it that also creates another problem.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. Is just if, as we touch on that, before we skip over it, is there anything that you would want to share with people who identify as,
Mm.
addicts?
Well,
Like,
yeah, I think what I'll share about is just my own experience of like having someone not that long ago, propose to me that perhaps I was an addict. Um, and at once feeling very sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Not offended by that, but I was like, not me.
yeah,
And also feeling like, thank God someone sees me, like, I don't know. I'd gone from, and I remember going to one of my first meetings and it was an all addiction meeting. So there were sex addicts, heroin addicts, you name it. People are at this meeting. And I remember saying to my coach after going to the meeting, like, I, I don't relate to these people. Like, my life is good. Look at my life. And she was like, consider how it's actually worse for you. And that question, I think about it all the time because it isn't worse for me. It's not worse for anybody or better for anybody, but that's kind of the point. Is like looking at like, oh, my addiction is invisible. Nobody can see it. Um, and that's so lonely. Like, I'm not saying it's better to have heroin addiction because everyone can see it, but it's also not worse,
yeah.
you know? So what I would say to people is, oh God, there's just so much freedom in relating to yourself as an addict. And it's just a context. I'm not saying I don't even know if food addiction is a real scientific thing. There are lots of people who tell you it is. There are lots of people who tell you it isn't. It doesn't matter to me because when I relate to myself as a food addiction, when I say to myself, I am powerless against this substance. I don't know why. I don't know the science behind it. It doesn't matter. I know I'm powerless. I get all of my power back in the rest of my life. If I can admit that I'm powerless against that and hand it over, it's just like, oh, it's so good. I love, love, love recovery work. It's so powerful. But it takes something to admit that powerlessness because we want so much to be in power and we feel like having power over ourselves is success. Having willpower, using our will, we think is success. It's not. We actually have very little power and very little will.
This is a great spot. First, thank you for all that, for sharing all that, all the right. Like, I didn't know how deep we were going to go into your addiction work and what you've overcome, but also really sharing the connection between you were living this life that was so successful in so many ways. And we didn't even, you're married, right? Like
Yep.
you're having kids through this whole process,
Yep.
um, you know, achieving on a outward professional space and then having the courage to like, this isn't working. I'm going to create, what I want for myself. Um, and the thing that we just got to is like you surrendered to
Yeah.
so much of your life. You surrendered, in the career you want, you surrendered to food or addiction. So now we're here, and what are you currently struggling with or challenged by or want to look at?
Yeah. So one of the areas, I would say the main area that I hit my head up against the wall on a lot is in my marriage. And um it really isn't so I told you this before we started recording, but I'll say it here for the listeners. Like before I came on this podcast, I said to my husband, like, I'm gonna go on this podcast and I'm gonna talk about how I show up in relationship. Cause I wanted to share that with him. I thought it was fair that if I was gonna go say all this stuff, he should know about it.
Probably a smart move.
Yeah. Um, and I also think that speaks to the nuance of this because in many ways we have I felt comfortable bringing it to him. It was a little bit vulnerable
Yeah.
and I felt like he could hold it, and I said, like, I'm going to go talk about how I show up in relationship. It's not about you because it isn't about him. This is about how I show up. It wouldn't matter who I was married to. This is how I would be showing up.
Hmm.
Because it's my stuff. So it really, and he, he was like, yeah, of course. He's very supportive. He's like, go and talk about it. He's like, maybe I'll learn something. Um, He's like, it'll be instructive for me because the thing I struggle with is my avoidant attachment style. If anyone is familiar, most people I feel like are familiar. If they're listening to this podcast, probably have some vague, idea about attachment theory. Um, and I'm an avoidant. I cannot. It's very hard for me to let love in, especially romantic love. Um, it's something I want more than anything. We all do. That's all anybody wants is to feel love. And I really struggle to be open to that. And and I've and it's hard. And it's hard to be able to see it.
Yeah.
This is the thing about addiction too, right? Because you can see it and it's so hard not to be able to change it, especially when you're a brilliant woman who has like willed her way through a lot of stuff. I can't will my way through this. Um, so I show up in my relationship as like pretty closed off, very righteous, quite controlling, as my default. And and it's not how I want to show up.
So you kind of show up like a lawyer.
Yep.
I find, and I'm joking for you lawyers out there, obviously not always true, but I've worked with a lot of lawyers. I've dated lawyers.
Yeah.
And what I notice when I'm in those relationships or even with those clients is it triggers my righteousness.
Yeah.
It triggers my like wanting to perform. It triggers my get all in my brain
Yeah.
and not in my body or in my emotions or my feeling. Um, you also told me right before we started that you just had this breakthrough conversation or awareness conversation where you were going to actually stop trying to work on your marriage.
Yeah.
But now we're here.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So we just came to this at the end of that moment where we talked about all these things you surrendered to. And then actually right before you got to this call, not right before, but in the days before, you decided to surrender in your relationship.
Sorta. Yeah. Which feels like, well, it used to feel like giving up.
Hmm.
And that's what I thought it was. So I've been working with a coach one on one full time. This will be my fifth year, I think, 4 times a week. So basically, like 48 times a year, 48 hours a year times five. I don't know what the math is on that. It's a lot of hours of coaching. And in our work, in the way we were trained as coaches, we have projects, right? And so I have always had a marriage project on the docket.
Yeah.
Since the moment I walked into coaching, I was like, I'm a shit wife. I'm,
Mm.
I show up like a total fucking asshole in my marriage and I don't want to be that way. And so it's always been there. It's always been there. Like I suck. And this is how I'm getting emotional about it because this is how I do everything, right? Like I suck. Let me fix myself. And this is part of so part of my addiction is fixing and controlling, including myself, first and foremost myself, right? Like totally addicted to like finding what's wrong with me and then trying to fix it. Um, and that's like when you're doing that, it's really easy to do that outside of the context of a relationship. Um, because you can be under the illusion that you do have some control when you're not in relationship with other people. But getting married and having kids gives you absolutely nowhere to hide. Like you can't just walk away and be like, "Oh, I didn't want that anyway." Like no big deal. Like you're in it. Um so all of that is to say like I've been working trying to be better, to trying to fix how I show up in a relationship for 5 years now. Um and I have made massive strides in how I show up. 100%. Like if it weren't for coaching, if it weren't for recovery, I'm certain I would be divorced. Certain of it. Like, no question. I am crazy. um, so I've really like I it's not that I haven't made strides in this area because I have, but I still don't show up the way I think I'm supposed to be showing up. And instead of continuing to try to close that gap between where I am and where I think I should be, I've decided just recently to say like to actually accept where I'm at and love myself where I actually am and how I actually show up in a relationship right now because I can't help it.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that really drives me the most crazy about the coaching world is this narrative of like, you can't control anything, but you can control how you show up. It's like, actually, I can't some of the time because I am a slave to my nervous system and I'm a slave to my attachment style a lot of the time.
So I'm curious about, again, we like you said it perfectly. It's not about your husband.
Yeah.
This is really you. But I'm curious if I made you leave right now and we sat your husband down
Yeah.
and I asked him about you and I said, "Hey,
Yeah.
how is she as a wife and a partner and as a mother?"
Yeah.
What do you think he would say?
He would say that I'm a wonderful mother. He would say I'm actually a really wonderful wife and that I'm really closed off and that he wished that he could have more of me.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah. But that he would, and that he wants that, right? Like that he wants more.
totally. Totally.
Uh,
My
So
husband adores me.
yeah, and what I heard you just say like a second ago too is like I'm crazy, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know that most people would be like, I want more of that, right? Like he actually wants more, which is ironic, right? You're describing there's like these two. I know you have you have a podcast that's all about spirituality. So let's talk
Yeah.
about it like your dark and your light, right?
Yeah.
Your light is like so faith and trust and this desire to be your best self and not your best in the old way,
Yeah.
but in a way that actually serves you. And then there's this dark side, which I think you and I would relate to. It's not bad.
No.
It's more just like the things that we don't pay attention to, the things that we're not aware
Yeah.
of, the
Yeah.
habits, the behaviors, the patterns that are unseen. That is kind of like I need to do better. I need to do more. I'm not doing it right. So if you're open to it, I would love to kind of hear from both of them. I
Yeah.
think that could be fun and interesting.
Yeah.
So if let's start with like your dark, you did it a little bit, but like if the darkness, if I was just talking to Megan's dark side,
Mhm.
what would she say about your marriage?
Um, she would say that I'm a selfish piece of shit, that I only care about myself, that um I am mean. One of my like fears about myself is I'm this like really mean, ugly person.
Mm,
So that I'm like really mean, really vindictive. I know like just the right pain point to hit, like um manipulative, um that I'm controlling. And then if I don't get what I want, I use emotional manipulation to get it. And then that makes me a piece of shit. And almost like bordering on like I'm an abusive spouse. Like when I'm at my like darkest, I'm like, oh, I'm abusive. This is what abuse this is emotional abuse. That's what I tell myself in my darkest moments. And I tell myself in my darkest moments that my kids would be better off without me.
when you're in the dark part of you, or you're relating to yourself as like the dark Megan,
Yeah.
how does it feel?
Oh, it's like so painful. It's like so painful and lonely. And it's like you tell yourself like I'm the only one who feels this way, right? Like it's like all this lie about like it's just so lonely. Nobody else feels this way. Like I'm this monster, It's so painful and lonely. It's like that's like I have this urge to leave. Like I would never leave my kids. I am a good mother. I know that's like the light part, right? We're staying in the dark for a minute, but like I would never leave my kids. There's no part of me that's ever going to do that. But in those moments, I understand why people do. Because sitting in the pain of how you're showing up when you don't want to show up that way is excruciating.
And I mean, I imagine I don't have kids, but I
Yeah.
imagine even just the thought of it,
Yeah.
the shame that it would induce that like I'm
Oh,
a mother who thinks my kids would be better off
yeah.
without me or that I should
Yeah.
leave. So then it becomes
Yeah.
like a whirlpool where you're just getting pulled closer and closer to the
Totally. Totally. Because it's like, well, what kind of monster would wanna leave her kids, right? We're so conditioned that, like, a good mother is, like, so devoted to her kids, and so yeah, totally. So it's just, like, shame on top of shame on top of shame on top of shame.
which is also something that rarely we hear about,
Yeah.
right? We rarely hear about mothers feeling like this, and being so hard on themselves and judging themselves and not actually just being okay with, right? Like they can't have a feeling or a thought. It's like then has to go 4
Yeah,
levels further.
totally.
Um, okay. So what if we could talk to the light?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you need to like take a deep breath and put your feet on the ground and
But it's actually I have quite a bit of access to that part of me right now. Um, the light is like, I am exactly who I'm playing out exactly what I came here to play out, right? Like, this is exactly who my higher power, my like, God put me here as, all of it. And the light can see that there is no, um it's too simplistic to say it this way, but I don't know how else to say it. Like, there is no right and wrong. Like, there is no wrong way to show up. This is exactly how I am, and it shows up for me. I can see it more with my kids than I can with my husband because it feels like my husband, um, chose me in this lifetime, but my kids chose me spiritually, right? So, like, I can see that, like, they chose the exact right parent for them spiritually before they even got here. And this is, like, the contract they signed up for. It's a little like I said, it's a little bit harder with my husband because 'cause I'm like, he chose me from his programming maybe. I worry that, like, he chose me from his own like, he basically chose to marry his mother. Sorry if you're listening to this, Ian's mother, but, like
wait, hold on a second. Cause we have to, I can't let you go past this without,
Yeah, yeah, sure.
how come as a s I couldn't necessarily ask this to someone who doesn't have a spiritual connection to or a spiritual relationship.
Yeah,
How come you and your husband couldn't have made this choice from a
totally.
spiritual place and
Yeah.
chosen each other?
And for my lightest, I do believe that. I do believe that, like, our spirits chose each other. There's something for both of us to learn from each other that, you know, and there's nothing wrong with us playing out our childhood wounding on each other. I think that's the part that I get caught up on, especially if I spend too much time on social media, is like, it's bad and wrong to be playing out your childhood stuff on your partner, and you got to go figure it out so that you can, like, show up clearer for your partner, which I don't disagree with necessarily. It doesn't help me where I'm at right now, which is, like, actually making it okay for however I show up and however he shows up. And to instead of practice, like, I'm getting this wrong, I gotta go figure out how to get it right, actually accepting and loving myself exactly how I'm showing up and exactly how he's showing up and exactly how it's manifesting for us, and not making it bad or wrong, but just making it how it is, you know? So I do think we did choose ourselves, but my what I'm reflecting is that my ego has a harder time with that one than it does with my kids.
Yeah, I'm imagining too. This is gonna sound funny, but like if you as some if somebody didn't if I as well as somebody who doesn't have children, if I was like, oh my god, I can't have kids because I'm gonna play out all my crap on them. So I'm gonna go pretend to be someone else's parent so I can like practice and work it out. That doesn't really make any sense. And I hear that in with your husband, it's like this idea that you shared social media and other things. It's like I should be working on my own crap and then show up to him perfect.
Yeah,
And over here, I'm listening and I'm like, no, it's like avoiding the game to just do practice all the time. Like your husband
totally.
is the field in which you two get to work out
Yeah,
your greatest achievements in a way.
yeah,
Right? You get to work out and practice. And he sounds like a pretty great guy in the sense that he
it is.
right allow you to not I shouldn't say allow, it's not the right word, but he would be supportive of you being here.
He has a lot of space, which
Yeah.
is why he's perfect for me in many ways. Like, he has so much space. He's just an easygoing guy. Like, But in my dark, I'm like, oh, I'm taking advantage of an easygoing guy. Like I can push him around, like all of that, right? That's the dark though. But the light is like, oh wow, like my soul chose this man who can actually hold all of this.
Mhm.
He doesn't know what to do with it. Like that's okay. It's not his job. He doesn't need to know what to do with it, but he can hold it. He can hold a lot of it.
Yeah. Well, if we look back at how far you've come,
Yeah.
and then the thing you just right, the light says, "There's no right and wrong.
Yeah.
My soul chose this." And you've just, prior to this conversation, decided to surrender to, quote, unquote, "working on your relationship."
Yeah.
How would the light direct you forward?
um how would the light direct me forward? Do you mean in my marriage in this particular area?
Yeah.
Well, the light is directing me forward to radical self-acceptance, um, which is kind of like, buzzword these days, but it really is like when I think I understand what radical self-acceptance is intellectually until I bump up against the next way that I'm just completely fucking shitting on myself. And I'm like, oh, that too? Shit. Like I have to give up that. Like, and this is where I'm at with this, right? Is like I really have been I can see now that I've been resisting I thought I was accepting myself as I was, but I wasn't. I was shitting on all the ways I was showing up in my marriage, but I thought that was self-love, right? Like I thought it was self-loving to beat myself into wanting to be better.
Mm.
And so right now the light is directing me to like really accept all of me, to really accept all of me no matter how I show up every single day. So at the end of every single day, this is kind of a 12-step thing. The 10th step is like essentially, you take inventory of your day. And up until very recently, that inventory was like going to the principal's office for me. It was like, let me look at all the ways I fucked it up today so I can atone and say I'm sorry. Um, and now I notice ever since I actually handed this thing over, or maybe I handed it over because I got here. I don't know chicken or the egg which came first, but I'm showing up to it as like a loving practice of like, oh, how do I get to like love myself? What do I get to forgive myself for today? What do I really love about myself today? Which is stuff I would have had written down before, but I wasn't actually internalizing it. I wasn't actually going there. Um, so that's where what I'm being called to right now. Um, it's just that like how many layers deep of acceptance can I go on this?
It's just kind of like, I don't know, I think as a coach, sometimes we get like hits, a little
Mhm.
tap into things. So for a second, if you'll indulge this curiosity, like I'm curious what you get from the darkness.
Mm. Well, it's really comfortable for me there. One of the things that I learned in food addiction in particular, um, is I thought I would have surmised that I turned to food the most when I was down, sad, triggered, all of that. What really surprised me was how much I wanted to turn to food when I felt joyous. Like the discomfort of sitting in joy.
I can
It
totally relate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so uncomfortable for me. So the darkness is just safe and comfortable. It gets like it's a place where I can stay, where I don't have to put my heart on the line, where I don't have to like put myself out there to be ridiculed, to be um, where like people might where I can't control the narrative. I can control the narrative of like I'm this like piece of shit, because then like if people think that, I'm like, yeah, I know. I already know that about myself. Nothing like you can't tell me that. Right. So it is it's really like a controlling the narrative of who I am so that people can't think stuff about me that I don't want them to think.
Do you get anything in the relationship or from your husband when you're in that in
Mm.
the dark?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, well, I think it's just more control. I'm trying to think like I get to not be understood. Um, I get to be like, you don't understand me. So it just gives me another like leg up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for something that really resonates for me, when you said the food thing,
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh, yeah, when I'm, like, busy and overwhelmed and stressed, like, food is so unimportant." And because I have, like, tunnel vision and,
Yeah.
something to, like, work on. And when things are great and whatever, then I'm eating, like, disgusting.
Mm.
And, I think in the same way, like, it'll create some chaos, and then the food makes me feel better for a minute, right? Then it makes me feel worse again. But I
Mhm.
think inside of when I look at that, if I take that same idea and I look at my relationship,
Mhm.
when things are actually great and fine, I'll have moments in my relationship where I'm like, I'm not a good enough partner. I'm not providing enough. I should be better. I'm going to disappoint her. I'm going to disappoint our kids eventually. And what I noticed was what I get was, well, look, I get to do the same thing as you, right? I have nothing to lose in that, right? Because I'm already in the rock bottom. But what I ultimately get is because I have a great partner, she shows up and is like, no, you're brave and you're brilliant and you're courageous and you're creative. And I know you'll never let me down. And I know that we're in this together. And if you never are anything more than you are right now, that's still who I want to be with.
Mhm.
And so then I get like
Mhm.
all this love and affirmation and acknowledgement.
Yeah.
So in my darkness, I'm creating,
Yeah.
and one might be like, well, why did I have to create the darkness to get? I could have just asked her why she. So
Yeah. It's like I need you to reflect to me why you love me. Yeah, I think so. I think so. I think yeah, I had this moment. Um, you and I both know Christopher McAuliffe, and on an AC training call, I think anyway, he asked a question like something like, "What did you have to do as a kid to get love?" Or something like that. It's kinda what you're saying, right? Like, and I was in the middle of my 4th step for the first time in 12-step work, and the 4th step, if anybody's done it, is a fucking doozy. Like, it's it's where you look at all your resentment, you just look at all of the ways you show up, and it's really gnarly. And Christopher asked this question, and I don't really have panic attacks, it's not something that I do. And I went and had a little like, I couldn't breathe, I was like because I could see, I was like, "Oh, I think that I needed to go to that dark place." Like, I needed to, like I needed to cry, I needed to, like, um I didn't know how to say like you said, I didn't know how to say, like, "Hey, I really need some love right now."
yeah.
Right? I had to, like, go to that really desperate place, and it really, like I think the panic I was having about that was, like, how much shame I had about that I didn't realize, how that's bad and wrong because I should be able to ask for my needs to get met, even though nobody ever like, I didn't learn that, and most of us don't, you know? Um, yeah, so I think there is something to that, like, I don't know how to get my needs met, don't know how to get my needs met, don't and there's, like, this deficit of needs until you're in the breakdown, and then, like, somebody has to meet you there. Like, if you're in a marriage, it's like, "Well, okay, shit, like, what do you need?" Right? So I do think that it is a way that I get my needs met because I don't know how else to get them met.
So from the light, if we can,
Yeah.
what would the light say about getting your needs met in your relationship?
Oh god. Um, well, that it's a practice and that the gradient at which I'm available to practice is probably a lot lower than I think it is. right? So, like, at first, I'd be like, "Well, I have to, like, go and ask for all my needs to be met, and I just gotta go and do that because first I'm gonna learn what they are, and then I'm gonna ask." Like, I would try to, like, put it in this perfect box, and it, like, that's a pretty steep gradient for somebody who's gone their whole life not knowing how to get their needs met, right? And so, if I sit in the light of it, it's like, like, tender, loving, probably starting with, like, my own curiosity about what my needs are rather than needing to share them with anyone ever, like, really just, like, if all I did for the next month was checked in with myself once a week about, like, "Hey, what do you need right now? What are your needs?" Like, that would probably be the gradient of practice at which would be loving and supportive and nurturing.
You wanna take that on?
Yeah.
Like a once a week check-in?
Yeah.
How do you wanna do it?
You know, um, there's this set of questions that I love, and I've actually gotten out of the practice of them, but it seems like a good time to bring them back. Do you know the Mary O'Malley questions?
I don't. Please share them.
Um,
Unless it's like 100 questions.
it's 4. It's only 4.
Okay, go ahead.
So it's in this moment, what am I experiencing? For this moment, can I let it be here? I can send these to you after. For this moment, can I touch this with compassion? And in this moment, what do I need? So, one of the as I'm saying that, one of the practices that I've been doing a lot lately, I have a daily practice of, like, meeting with my 6-year-old self
Mm,
and just, like, sitting with her. Because ultimately all any of this
yeah,
is a 6-year-old who didn't know how to get their needs met and is, like, doing what they do to having a tantrum, right? And so my practice is, like, sitting with her and just being like, "Hey, what's going on?" Or, like, sometimes just sitting with her because she doesn't wanna talk, you know? Um, so as I'm saying those questions, I'm like, "Oh, I think I've been doing that with my 6-year-old, but I haven't actually been asking her what she needs and, like, listening for an answer and seeing if I can give that to her." So I think, like, incorporating that next step of, like, "Hey, what do you actually need right now? Do you know?" Do you know what you need? And making that inquiry. So I see sort of folding that into the mix of my daily practice would be pretty cool.
beautiful. Is there any because you brought that your 6-year-old self in, I'm curious if there's anywhere that you could get either needs met or practice with your kids?
Mm.
Not for them, but for you.
Oh, that's a good question. It's interesting because, like, right now, I yeah, I am actually right now practicing with them. Like, oh, it's so hard. It's like, ugh, this is a codependent thing, right? This is like, we are not responsible for other people's feelings is like a good swing for me away from codependency, right? Like, we are not responsible to make other people happy. And from that place, that can also become, like, dangerously independent, right? And so it's like, how do I not make my kids, how do I support my kids to not become codependent with me and make them responsible for my feelings, but also teach them that I have needs and how to have, like, a beautiful interdependent relationship where they can take into consideration my needs, or, like, how do you take into consideration someone's needs and how do you be in relationship with somebody without fixing them or saving them or owning their stuff? It's a doozy. So I think for me, I have been like, "Oh, mom needs a break right now." Like, I notice that I'm really overwhelmed by all the noise, and I need a break right now. And that is so uncomfortable for me. Like, oh, like I they're gonna think that they suck. They're gonna think that they're too much. All of my like programming about how to be a good mom shows up, right? Like I shouldn't make them responsible for my feelings. I shouldn't make them feel like they're too much. I shouldn't make them feel like they're not like all of that comes up, and I'm just like, I have to stay in here, and I have to like not show them that they're getting to me. Anyway, all of this is to say it's something I'm kind of already practicing, but I think your question brings up for me like just being a little bit more out loud about it. Like I have a need, like even using the word need, like, oh, I have a need for this right now. Um, and inviting them to support me with it. Like, could you help me with that? That's the thing I don't do. I'm just like, oh, triggered, gotta go in the bedroom and breathe. Mommy will be right back. But I actually don't invite them to support me. And I don't know what would be appropriate and what wouldn't. Like I'd have to
Yeah.
think about where that line is for me. But
I'm so present to thinking about my childhood and how I don't remember my parents getting their needs met at all.
yeah,
Now, they may have, right? I'm a kid. I didn't see everything. But what I remember is them working, them doing grown-up things like making sure our lives worked, right? Like keeping the
yeah,
house, like planning things, taking care of us, our sports, our homework, all our things, driving us around. And then I remember like normal relationship fights, right? Like I
mhm,
don't remember anything that was like shouldn't be happening, but just how adults are when they have a lot on their plates. But I don't really remember, my mom being like, I'm gonna go meditate, which she
yeah,
does now, but she didn't do when we were kids, or I'm gonna go take a bubble bath, or dad's gonna go take a nap. These things may have happened, but what I feel like I learned as a kid was you just like power through and you go,
mhm, mhm,
and you don't get to complain about what's wrong. And I'm now thinking about like how probably so many fights between my parents or when they would get mad at us were probably caused because their tank essentially of emotional capacity was like was so depleted beyond
yeah,
empty.
yeah,
Um, so I say that because I'm like, I almost hear that from you, right? Like, could it serve them to like
yeah,
actually see a mom who's modeling,
yeah.
I'm important and we got to take care of ourselves.
Well, I think I am modeling it because I do meditate every morning. They know that, like, don't come into mom room. But what I'm not necessarily doing is like narrating that,
Hmm.
like, oh, I'm getting my needs met. Like, I have a set of needs and I got to get them met. I think that that's the piece that's missing. And as I'm hearing you talk about it, I think that the practice for me may actually be acknowledging myself for what I'm already doing because I'm actually doing a phenomenal job of taking care of myself with 2 little kids.
Yeah.
And it still feels like not enough because I have such a my nervous system has such a low tolerance that I'm like, I had this fantasy that if I could just meditate every morning, that my kids would never trigger me. And like that fantasy did not play out. Spoiler alert, right? So I am doing a phenomenal job of taking care of myself. Sure, there's always more room for it, right? Like, but I've built this beautiful life for myself where I'm getting a lot of my needs met a lot of the time. But A, I'm not acknowledging myself for it because it never feels like enough because I'm still not showing up as this Zen mommy that I hoped. And B, I think I could narrate that to myself and them more. Like, great job getting your needs met today, or great job, like, even though it was hard, you carved out that time, or, the alarm went off and you didn't want to get up, but you did it anyway. Like, really just acknowledging that for me.
Mm.
Because I am naturally a martyr and I really have done a lot of work around that. And I've really, really like stepped up my game with myself.
Well, it's also to come back to you're already practicing a lot of things. Your light was like lower the gradient,
Yeah.
which it sounds like a pretty low gradient activity to simply acknowledge what you're
Yeah.
doing already,
Yeah.
right? We're not asking you to do anything else, but
Yeah.
just to be with
Yeah.
all that you are doing.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. I think
Now,
that's the like volume to turn up.
Yeah, I'm also here, like, I'm getting a lot of, like, there's actually nothing wrong.
Totally.
All
Yeah.
the in the life you used to live, there was so much that was wrong, right?
Yeah.
The addictions and the unhappiness. You have a great husband, you have all these great practices to take care of yourself, you have a great business,
Yeah.
you have kids that, like, we haven't talked too much about them, but, like, that love you and that you love them and that your family works, and that all the things that we've been talking about that in theory don't work are inside of your head.
Totally. Yeah. 100%. And that's what I'm working on right now is that like it is wonderful. And I still have my shit.
Totally.
Like
From the dark though, right? Like, it
totally.
all
Totally.
so so let's just sit here. So if we come back to your marriage, and which you're surrendered to,
Yeah.
if all you did going forward was, um, if you approached your husband or your marriage from light, is
Yeah.
there a practice there based on, like, what we've kind of this journey we've been on?
Well, I think I'm practicing it. And I know I kind of keep saying that, but I said this to you before we started the call. Like part of, I don't know if it's the chicken or the egg, right? But you invited me on this podcast. I knew that this was the thing to talk about. Because I knew this was the thing to talk about, I started talking about it in a new way I hadn't before. And then I brought it to my coach. And then where I got with her was like to surrender this. And I'm like, well, shit, now can I go on Alex's podcast because I've surrendered this thing? So to me, that really is the thing. It's like really, I think, really accepting exactly how I am and loving that part of myself, that dark. In in particular, in the way it shows up in my marriage
Yeah.
is loving that part of myself because it's not going anywhere.
You touched on something too that I think, if for people that don't have coaches, who have never done therapy, who maybe
Yeah.
don't do transformational work or, personal growth work, or even like plant medicine work,
Mhm.
often will, at least I do, I'll say to someone when they start working with me, or even when I'm about to do something, the journey just started.
Yeah.
Once you've like said yes to something, the journey starts even if you haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
So you said yes to this podcast, which for most people is vulnerable, like, you're talking about something that's not working in your life, which is not something we do publicly.
Yeah.
And then it's like the gears started turning, right, which created something. And I
Yeah.
often, when somebody signs up to work with me, I'm getting ready to go on an ayahuasca retreat, and I notice I'm having conversations about the things I wanna transform or heal, and I haven't even like, I haven't done it yet, it's weeks away,
Yeah.
and I don't think I don't I wish I'm so glad you said it, because I don't think people realize often that that's the thing that kicks it off, is that
Yeah.
we keep saying no because 'cause we're not ready.
Yeah.
We'll say, "No, I'm not ready to have that. I don't have the money. I don't have the time." But then because we don't say yes, we, like, hoard that problem
Mhm.
or that dilemma or that trauma. But as soon as we say yes, it's like the doors got kicked open,
Yeah.
and the universe is just like, "I got you now."
Totally. I think what I hear in that, or maybe another way of saying it is like, we think we know what it's gonna take, so we say no to it.
Mhm.
'Cause we think in our heads, we're like, "I know what I'm gonna have to do. I'm gonna have to go sit in 2 hours of therapy. I'm gonna have to like," or whatever it is, right? We think we know. And what you're saying is like, once you say yes, and this is my experience too, it does not take what you think it's gonna take. It never does, because there's some forces at work that are gonna come in and do what they do if you let them. It doesn't take what you think it's gonna take.
Yeah.
It doesn't require you, because for me, it's like the way I get it. The way I used to get anything is to beat the crap out of myself to get it. So of course I'm not going to say yes to this because it's just going to be another place I beat the crap out of myself, right? But now I'm like, oh, I can say yes to this if I'm feeling called to it because I trust things are going to unfold, and I don't have to use my sheer will and force and shame and all of that to get it, which is what I used to do.
Yeah, and I think that's really common. We're taught, "Oh, you want something? Like, write it down, make a list of all the things you have to do."
Yep.
Well, that list becomes overwhelming,
Yeah.
never ending, and we actually don't just say yes to
Yeah.
the thing. We We said yes to a list and a whole bunch of jobs.
Right, which are probably not gonna get us the thing anyway because we're not letting the thing unfold. We're, like, cock blocking the universe with all of our, like, over, you know,
Well, which I think
micromanagement.
creates to come full circle, it for someone listening and being like, "No, but, like, I've achieved all these things because of that."
Yeah,
So did you, right? You
yeah,
became a lawyer, you became
totally.
a and I think that's the kind of mind fuck that we have to let go of is, no, it will. You can work your ass off and structure and use your brain to create anything you
Sure.
want in a solution.
Yep,
But when you do it that way, do you actually get what you wanted?
and it's
Which
exhausting.
yeah, like you wanted to be a lawyer, you wanted to be a mom, you wanted to get married for not to be the lawyer, to because you thought it would mean something else.
Yeah,
And I'm so in just in this, how we do this and then we get in that loop. So we get the thing, but we don't get the thing that we really wanted,
yeah,
which is like what we're playing with, which I believe is like what the light is trying to tell us is like,
yeah,
hey, there's another way to get,
yeah,
there's a whole nother way to get the marriage you want
yeah,
or to be the Megan you want.
yeah,
And it's not the, you know, beat yourself,
yeah, grind for it, yeah. It
work
was
at it.
yeah, yeah. It was, and this might be the last thing I say about it, but, like, as I was thinking about coming on this podcast, I was really present to had I been on your podcast a year ago, the way I'd be speaking about this would be totally different. It would be like, "Let me tell you what a piece of shit I am," and let me tell you all the ways I know what a piece of shit I am and all the ways I'm, like, trying to work on it. And now like, you heard me say that when you asked me about the dark,
Mhm.
but I'm very present to, like, I will not shame myself for this. I will not use shame as a defense, like, I this is how I show up right now, and it's okay.
So before you came on here, I asked you, I sent you like a questionnaire, right? Things. And one of the things you said when you talked about the success that you've achieved
Mhm,
is I asked you, what have you learned about yourself, life, or business making this success possible? And you said,
mhm,
I've learned to embrace the unknown and harness the greater wisdom of the universe to
mhm,
support my life so I don't have to do it all.
totally.
That's sitting on another screen. And I'm like, wow, that's what it's like it's like you've known all along.
Mhm,
It's been here. The thing that actually has made you successful in all these other areas is the thing in this area too, right? It's
yeah.
just
I didn't think that though until recently. I was like, "But this is different. This I have to, like, beat the crap out of myself about to get, like." And that's when I was like, "Oh, yeah, I'm doing the same thing." Because I thought even, like, surrender, I was trying to perform, right? I was like, "Okay, I'm just gonna surrender it." But that means I have to control what an asshole I am. I don't know.
I'm just thinking as a someone who, who's in a relationship, like, just what I want, a partner who just beats himself up.
Totally right.
That's like super attractive and
Totally.
desirable. And as a kid, right? Like just what I want, a mom who is
I
just like
know.
horrible to herself.
I know.
So
It's
counterintuitive.
so counterintuitive. And yet it's the way we got everything else in life, so or at least the way I got everything else in life.
Well, yeah, to a point though, right? Like
Yeah.
I think I'm looking at your life over here going, there's the before and the there's two. If we were writing an autobiography of your life, it could be part one and part two. Part one is right, like success through the should and the grind. And
Yeah.
part two is like living from faith
Yeah.
and trust.
Trust. Yeah, trusting in something bigger than myself, trusting that something's unfolding that I can't see, trusting I don't have the answers. Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to say or share before we wrap this
Mm.
up? Anything else you need?
No, that was perfect, and it was, like, again, the perfect time to have this conversation in my life. This came up just at the right time, so thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. First of all, thanks for so partnering with me and making this first episode. Right, I, I I had no idea how this was going to go. I was just on a trip, and multiple times I was like, "What am I doing?" I'm just gonna like, not only am I asking people to come on and be so vulnerable and share something that's happening right now, right? It's not like let's talk about the thing that happened in your
Yeah,
past.
yeah,
That there's some distance or space with. And I kept getting in my, who am I to do this? is this okay? Um, and so thanks for being the perfect person for me to do this with the first time. Cause I felt really, even though it was not your job, like I felt really safe.
Hmm.
Um, and just your courage and your capableness and your resiliency is so apparent that like just as we started, I was like, oh, this is gonna go well and exactly how it's supposed to go. I don't need to actually do anything here.
Yeah.
I just get to hang out with her and play around and ask some questions and look at stuff for myself, right? At the same time, like, how am I doing this? So thank you for being that partner, as well as as guest on this show. If people want, I'm not going to ask everyone, people as they come on the show might not want to be like reached out to, might
Yeah.
not want to put their information. Do you want to share if people want to reach out to you? Do you want to share
Yeah.
information?
Yeah. So megansmithcoaching.com is the best place to find me. I'm on Instagram at Coach Meghan Smith. That's where you can reach out to me, or reach out to Alex. He knows how to reach me. If you hear something that resonates for you, reach out. I'd love to chat with you.
Megan, thanks again so much for coming on here and just the courage and the bravery and bringing all the emotions and all the truth, and just the full spectrum of who you are, the dark and the light. I'm super
Thank you.
grateful. And
Thank you.
you're welcome. Listeners, anybody, please, so much came up on this episode about being a mother, about being a partner or a wife, about trying to get it right and do all the things and the thoughts we think that are not pleasant. If you know somebody who should listen to this, please share it with them. And if you're sitting there going, wait, I want to be on this show, feel free to reach out to me, Alex at thedreammason.com. You can go to thedreammason.com to get more information. And we can have a conversation about you possibly being a guest. Otherwise, thank you for listening. I'm just, I'm really grateful. Episode 1 and is done. And
In
we
the
will see
can.